sports is how, we play out what it means to be American. Sports is like one of our most powerful contexts through which we play that out. And it's, again, it's not all bad. It's not all good. It's just, it makes things complicated.
That's Matt Bowers of the Cap City Cobras, talking real big picture about sports in America. Welcome to Sandlot Social Club. I'm Adam, your host. In addition to being my teammate and holding down first base, Dr. Bowers is a professor in the Department of Kinesiology and Health Education at the University of Texas, where he studies sports development systems and teaches a signature class about building winning teams. Naturally, we had a lot to talk about. His field of study is fascinating, so we met up for a chat in his office at the football stadium to toss around a few ideas on a quiet summer day, and I got to sit in the student chair, a few inches lower than Matt, and learn a thing or two about what keeps us playing.
I mean, I loved sports. I wanted to be the general manager of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when I was a kid. I'm from the Tampa Bay area. And as I was thinking about colleges and where I would go and what I would pursue, looking at, some nerdier spots and stuff, and then realized I want to study sports. You don't go to the symphony to study hip hop. You go to a public institution where sports are king and queen, right? So I studied sports management as an undergrad, master's student, a doctoral student. I literally might be the first person who did all of those. It's a relatively new field. And while I was at the University of Florida, I worked with the football program for a bunch of seasons in a student capacity, working with compliance and recruiting and stuff like that. I had an opportunity to go and work as a grad assistant with the women's basketball program at the University of Florida, which was super fun, was getting into coaching, and then kind of realized I don't want to be a coach. And at the time, I had some professors at Florida that were like, hey, you'd be a pretty good professor, probably. So I started looking into that, had some opportunities, and decided to come to Texas because that's where I could work under a woman named Chris Green, studying athlete development systems, which is what I'm really interested in. And so did my PhD here. There happened to be a little sort of opening, a vacuum that was created right as I was winding down, and I've been able to stay on ever since. So,
what does that mean that you study development systems? A lot of people think of sports as games.
Yeah, and we'll probably come back to this, but I do as well to a certain extent. When we talk about systems for athlete development, I'm talking about what is the zoomed out kind of macro ways we think about how policy, program design, all these things impact the way that athletes are developed. So naturally, my interest didn't necessarily start there, but I've ended up in a place where I focus a lot on youth sports because, that is where this all happens. And in the U.S., we are such a unique unsystem, if you will. We don't like government intervention. We don't have a lot of really clear guiding policies. It's very much a market-driven approach to how we develop athletes, which is a double-edged sword. So it creates some interesting opportunities and has not prevented us from being a global sports superpower. But there's so many things we could do better to create better experiences for kids, develop better athletes in healthier ways.
Yeah, I read in your bio or something, it says the impact is on performance outcomes and mass participation. And I was trying to think of what that means. And to me, that means the way that, professional athletes or athletes in training show up in the games that they're playing, but also the way that we all relate to these games and either in playing them or watching them or following them or supporting other people playing them, our family members, our children and such.
Yeah, no, that's it. And I think there's this false dichotomy that you can either try to create things that are good for everybody, the average person, or you know, are focused on elite development, and those aren't mutually exclusive and they don't have to be. And so how do we create ways that allow everybody to get a better sports experience and to be included in the sports systems that we have in ways that we just don't currently allow?
It's very interesting, and it makes me think of my experiences in youth sports too. In particular, a lot of Little League. You know, I played a lot of Little League and a lot of travel baseball. I never thought of it at the time as a system. My lens on the world has changed a lot as I've gotten older too. And then, of course, meeting folks like you who are like, I study this. And I'm like, yeah, it is real. It's a real thing. Like, these things are impacting us. And I see that now a lot more clearly as an adult. But when you're in it, you're really close to it and you don't see how it's having an effect on you.
No, and you don't see it. And we see this a ton with, you know, you can't separate like talking about kids without talking about parents as well in these youth sports experiences. And we pull people into this arms race of like, how much can I just bludgeon my kid with personal trainers and additional this and travel club that? It is kind of sucking the fun out of sport. And that's part of what drew me to studying this stuff was, you know, I was coaching at a relatively elite level. And it's just like I had these sort of moments where looking around, I was like, why isn't anyone having any fun doing this? Like, I know there are stakes. I know there are reasons to take this very seriously. But at the same time, like, it is a game. And that's not to like oversimplify it, but at its most like fundamental level, it is a game. And like, so when I see a 14-year-old kid who's just like miserable at their job, that's basically, it's like looking at a 45-year-old who's like punching the clock at a cubicle. Like, you see that with some kids, they're just so overcommitted and overworked and overstructured and everything that like, they're kind of just punching the clock. Yeah,
and you mentioned overly structured spaces. And I know one of the areas that you specialize in.
This is a good segue.
This is a great segue. Really good segue. Is unstructured spaces into sports. So can you tell me a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, it means Sandlot, right? Like, I mean, it's like we're academic, so we have to put particular terms on it and all. But like my dissertation and all was looking at these unstructured spaces. Yeah. And you know, if we're to believe, and there's evidence to suggest we should, that recent generations have less opportunity to play in these kind of neighborhood, unstructured settings. If that's accurate, the question I approached my research with was, well, what are we losing then? Right? Like, and it's not to say that organized sports are bad. I'm very quick to always point that out. Like, I love sports on a number of levels, but I think about my favorite times, and maybe this is the case for you too, of like, my favorite times were not necessarily when I was playing at the highest level and it was like in the backyard with a friend's basketball hoop, or out making up some game, you know, or playing. I'm from Florida, going out in a hurricane and playing a football game with my friends that was just like the ultimate mud bowl and stuff. Like, those are the things that I think about as being really meaningful to me. And so I guess I started from a place of like unpacking why. Like, why is that meaningful? And what is there value in these experiences? And is there an urgency around like understanding this value as we seem to be losing more and more of that opportunity for kids?
And so it's sort of uncanny or a coincidence of some sort that you would also end up in your life playing on a baseball team. Is it a coincidence, or have you been planted here?
Or have I been?
You rose up out of the ground at Patterson Park.
I did. So I got my start. And so I should probably back up and say, I'm not really a baseball player. I left baseball pretty quickly, in part because, this might get me in trouble, but in part because like I didn't like baseball kids. They were the kids that were like kind of like bullyish, you know, in my space. And
this is in Florida.
This was in Florida,
which is like a baseball state where their baseball kids were like baseball kids.
Yeah. And maybe it was just that they were more serious than I wanted to be at the time or whatever, but like the vibe was off for me. Yeah. And so I've always loved basketball. I went in kind of a basketball direction. So Seth, who was on the first episode of Sandlot Social Club, he and I did our PhDs together here at Texas. And he's obviously a big baseball maniac. And, you know, he'd been out with the Cobras for a three seasons maybe, and was like, hey, you should just come out. You know, he knows what I was interested in with the Sandlot stuff. He's like, just come and hang out. Like, I promise you, it's a cool space. And I was like, but I suck, or I assume I suck. I don't even know. And, you know, eventually, I don't know what it was that finally compelled me to do it. But he broke through, and I went out to a practice. I think I was wearing jeans. Because I think that's what I thought, like, Sandlot meant.
I mean, the Jet.
Yeah, I was thinking of... Yeah, I was thinking of wearing my PF Flyers and my jeans. And so I went out there. I was terrible and very sore for very long after. But, you know, to kind of the point that he was making, it was like, this is a different space. And this is the space that I'm constantly trying to cultivate, a space of inclusion, a space of like kind of equity almost. You know, like I know you throw those words out and that can say different things to people, but like when you look at the composition of a lot of these Sandlot teams from a age, skill, gender, you know, like from that standpoint, we see teams that couldn't really exist in any other form. Right. Like the Cobras, as they're constituted and have been, could not really exist in the same way as like a men's league team or something like that. Right. And so I quickly became really fascinated. I mean, it is kind of a laboratory to be embedded and thinking about a lot of the stuff and putting myself through a lot of the things that I'm advocating for kids. And it's been an amazing space. This is my 5th or 6th season.
So you'd been studying and thinking about structure versus unstructure for children in a youth sports, and then you entered this burgeoning space where adults were playing a game in an unstructured way. Mm-hmm. What kind of lights turned on in your brain while you were doing that? I'm imagining there's a lot of firing going on inside that. Absolutely. Inside that head of yours.
Oh, no, totally. Like, why does it work? Why is it growing? Why is it appealing to people? What is it doing that's different? You know, like spending a lot of time reflecting on those things. And I think first and foremost, when you think about, all right, let's look at organized, you know, like your kind of traditional organized adult baseball setting versus a Sandlot setting. It's like the internal logic is actually different. Mm-hmm. Some people might push back on this, but the obvious internal logic of a traditional men's league baseball team is to win the game, right? And it's not that in Sandlot we're not trying to win and do all that, but the internal logic is a little different. The internal logic of Sandlot is to keep playing, right? And so that changes things. That creates new opportunities. It creates challenges too, right? Especially, look, we've grown here in Austin. What are there, 1 billion teams now or something? Like we've exploded from, you know, the Playboys at the early onset being the iconic, the spiritual kind of starting point of Sandlot, to the Heart and Arrows and us, and then the growth that happened. It's fascinating to me because I look around and you see how there's been this appeal that's brought people in, but the more people you add to it, the more it kind of challenges the way that it works, right? Because you're bringing in more people. Teams are starting up, and teams are much more, I don't blame them. I feel like teams are much more focused on accelerating that like trajectory to being competitive. I mean, the Cobras didn't win a game for 3 seasons or something, right? And so now everybody wants to join in and be competitive and have fun. And like, that's natural. But what it's doing is it's like the team compositions are shifting to accelerate that ability to be competitive. And so that's a challenge, because when you have folks who come in and who aren't adhering to the sort of unwritten codes of Sandlot, then that creates a tension that has to be relieved or resolved. And we've seen it play out. Even in some of our own games, you probably remember, where it's like you can almost be like, that guy doesn't want to be here. Like that guy doesn't want to, he wants to play baseball.
Right.
and win, he doesn't really want to be in Sandlot.
Right.
Or maybe he thinks he does, but it doesn't quite know how to do that in a way where it sort of fits with the expectations. And the fact that it's so self-governed is really fascinating, right? So like we as a team have to like adhere to a certain social contract as we play. Right. And if we break that creates some tension, right? That has to be resolved. Because again, the logic of Sandlot is like there's no standings.
Yeah.
We're not playing for, and which is very important, by the way, to preserving what Sandlot is.
Yeah.
The fact that we do not have a playoffs and a finals and a championship and standings is actually one of the most critical factors in Sandlot being able to continue to be what it's been.
Why is that?
Because it shifts the calculus, right? Like, so for right now, it's our motivation is how do we keep playing?
Yeah.
Right? Like, how do we get more games on the books and do that? If you impose that structure onto it, it actually like inverts that. It flips it to where like we want fewer teams playing fewer games because that's how we show who's the best. And that's antithetical to Sandlot, at least as I sort of conceptualize it.
I see other leagues that kind of have standings around the country and stuff, and some of them, and a lot of them seem to have really good vibes too in some of those spaces. But it also, what you're saying makes me think about the long-term effects of that over time.
Right. It's corrosive. It'll be corrosive.
It's a sort of like slowly boiling pot. I really love that there are no standings. I don't know how I come off to other people on the team.
Like a real prick.
Probably a real asshole. I hope it's as somebody who like genuinely is trying as hard as possible just to not care about the outcome and just
absolutely. I mean, you are definitely one of the, I mean, you fit a sort of spirit animal archetype. We have a very long runway in terms of like, you can come hang out and practice for a long time, but like you don't get a jersey until you've been sort of vetted in a way that is, it doesn't mean we all have to be the same.
Right.
It just means that like you have to fit and play a role, and you have to help us with the goal of being who we are and continuing to play.
Right.
And I'm somebody who like does some stuff behind the scenes for the Cobras and all, like helps not steer the ship exactly, but just, sort of offer thoughts and advice. And we're maybe much more intentional than people might realize about stuff. Like for example, and TK, who to me is one of the iconic Sandlot legends, Thomas TK, topless TK King on the Cobras. He is such a quiet force for upholding certain values and approaches. So if you're listening to this and you've played the Cobras or whatever, like you may have noticed we never ever post the score. Maybe you haven't noticed, but we never ever do. And some of that comes from philosophically from TK and like how do we want to represent ourselves. And that's not a judgment of teams that talk about like, hey, we had a great win. Like that's totally the beauty of Sandlot is you can do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so like there may be teams, or we may be a team that people look at and are like, screw those. Like I don't like Cobras or whatever. And that's totally fine. But the beauty of Sandlot is just like, yeah, they can do it however they want. There is no requirements of the league or whatever. So yeah, we have a lot of kind of core values and principles that we try to uphold in different ways. This also partially comes from me being a nerd. And I actually teach a class at Texas. It's a signature course called Building Winning Teams, where we use sports and the research around high-performing teams to teach freshmen how to like work in a lab partnership, to be in a sorority, to work with their church group and like, or whatever it may, their intramural team.
Teams are everywhere.
Yeah. And so in that class, we use sports to sort of teach some of these core ideas. And so, I mean, those have probably unintentionally trickled into some of the things that we do with the Cobras. But I will say we're my favorite team that I've ever been a part of.
What are some of the things that it's done for you?
I think it's reminded me of some of the things that I say that I think are important. Every adult should be on a team in some capacity that isn't work, right? Like a recreational, social type of team. I think we would have a much happier country if they were. I think a team is a setting where you are forced to kind of constantly confront yourself, your deficiencies, your inadequacies, the things you do well, figuring out how do you contribute. And I know that like I'm not going to be a plus hitter on the, like in the box. Like it's probably not going to happen for me. So as, and maybe I can be replacement level, in the field. Like that's been my goal is like, you don't notice me in the field.
You want to be,
I want to be like the offensive line.
You told me, you told me once you wanted to be a designated fielder.
Yes, a designated fielder. So I don't have to get hit in the box. So for me, it's forced me to kind of recognize like, okay, I have some physical athletic limitations, especially at this stage in my life. I'm maybe not going to be this anymore. So what can I be? Can I be a glue guy, right? Can I be somebody who every single person on the team can feel a connection and warmth with, that can help mend things from behind and help, can I play that kind of role? And so it being on a team as an adult forces you to really confront that and wait. Like as a kid, you're delusional and you think like my son has been playing flag football and loves flag football. He thinks he's like Barry Sanders and he ain't. He's having fun. The world will show him he's not Barry Sanders. So you're delusional as a kid and your aspirations are really like everything is future oriented. As an adult playing in a no stakes kind of situation, everything is present. I look at Wednesday practices as just this almost maybe sacred kind of space for us as an us to come together and continue this, whatever this journey we're on together is. Like maybe there's a little dust up at practice. Maybe there's some things going on. Maybe there's some great plays. Maybe maybe it's
everyone is different.
Yeah.
Every Wednesday is a little different.
Every Wednesday is a little different.
Also a little bit the same.
Yeah. And but it's this opportunity to check in with yourself in a way that general adult living doesn't allow.
Yeah.
Coming to Sandlot, it has reminded me that this is what I believe to be true. I do think sports can be a context where good can occur. They're not, and my students would tell you this is one of my main talking points, like they are inherently or intrinsically neutral. They are powerful contexts. And I think a lot of the problems that we see develop in and through sports come from an assumption or a presupposition that sports are good. So like in my training of my students is to come at it from like sports are a powerful, neutral context that through your management or the way you design and deliver or create experiences, you can help sport achieve the potential that it has, but it doesn't do so automatically.
Yeah, it makes me think that in some ways, like sport is a mirror and it shows us a reflection
totally
of who we are.
Sports are us.
Yeah.
I say that all the time. And they are, like they're a place where you can't disentangle sports from politics, from, all and I know there's certain folks that would prefer that because it's like sports is an escape for them. But like, again, sports, they're who we are. They're a reflection of us, a mirror into the debates, the conversations.
All the big stuff.
Yeah,
politics,
they are.
Religion, money,
I mean, think
culture.
about it, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, that's what keeps me fascinated about sports and how they work.
A lot of the rhetorical questions you posed when you were putting yourself in the mindset of someone who is entering a team space were a lot of the questions that I was asking myself when I first started coming to practice.
Yeah.
What is my role here going to be?
Right.
How am I going to participate in this space? I remember a few weeks ago, you pointed at this catcher's mitt and you were like, oh, you got this catcher's mitt. I got that catcher's mitt last year. I was sitting at home and I thought, oh, a catcher is a super
Right, right.
is not a place where a lot of people want to go on a baseball field. But I'm okay getting hit by baseballs, so I'll go there sometimes.
It is, I mean, as you know, like if you can pitch or you can catch, there's some, especially if you're willing to catch in August in Central Texas. Again, that's the beauty of it, that like when you're a kid in this space, you don't have the life experience or the perspective to be able to think like, how do I create a valuable role for, but when you look at like the highest performing championship teams, they have real clarity about roles.
Mm-hmm.
And people embrace their particular role, even if it's just being a utility infielder who can be plugged in as needed or whatever. Like, and so, because when you're a kid, everything is about like, how do I become a star?
Right.
And that's totally like normal.
Yeah. And the systems that you talk about and study are designed and built to create stars. I mean, that's their primary objective.
100%. To our own detriment, really.
Baseball, as this activity, just has a lot of roles that you need to make it work well. It seems to me that there's something about it as a sport that makes it a really rich canvas for this sort of thing. And I'm wondering if you've ever thought about that, or in your time playing, have you considered the aspects of the game and what make it conducive to this sort of style of play?
That's a really good question that I don't know that I have a really good answer to. Baseball is a sport that is built on inefficiency.
I like
right?
that.
Like it's that's what makes it beautiful. And that's where like the art kind of comes into it, right? Like you might look at baseball and think of it, oh, it's so numbers based and it's very easy to kind of quantify the impact of individuals because of the fact that it's not that it's not that inner dynamic, right? Like in a particular play, there are a set number of outcomes that could be achieved. There is a likelihood that the ball is only going to be touched by maybe 2 to 3 people, probably in the process of getting an out. And so it might mislead you into thinking like, oh, baseball is actually this very like kind of like the clarity of the game and the way that you can kind of compartmentalize everything. But in fact, to me, what makes baseball so enduring in its being something compelling for us is the fact that it's inefficient and you don't know when the game's going to end. Right. And that you can't set your watch to it. And that, so much of what we build into it is almost like a subconscious effort to just keep playing. And that, I know I made that distinction earlier between like organized and Sandlot and the logics that kind of drive them. But I think that continues to be for me like so fundamental is like, we really just want to keep playing.
Yeah.
And so how do we structure things in such a way to allow that, right? And the Sandlot is this sort of symbolic space for not having time, not having, like even clear boundaries. And, like it's this very symbolic space that you make what you will of. Is that a sentence? I'm not sure.
Yeah, make of what you will.
Yeah, make of what you will. And I think that to me is what drives our collective enduring fascination. But in kind of coming to baseball late, my fascination is like, how do we just get another at bat? Or how do we just play another inning? And the things that we're, the sort of adorable little things that we're doing and not realizing all the time to just create that.
You were talking earlier about being on a team and experiencing struggling or experiencing failure. And there's a lot of that in baseball, particularly because people will say about it, oh, it's a game of failure. Even the best people fail 70% of the time and all of that. What's been your experience of kind of encountering that failure? How has that worked in your mind and body? And then how does that show up in the Sandlot space?
Well, I think the Sandlot space creates an opportunity to fail that is different, like qualitatively, like different than if I were to be playing in a competitive men's league or whatever, which I never would have been doing.
Yeah.
So like, that's like almost like a non-starter with it. And I think when we talk about this, people might think it comes across as if we sound like we don't care, but like I get pissed off when I strike out, which happens a lot. I mean, I was furious when Junior from the Hard Narrows struck me out on 3 pitches looking every single one of them. It was one of the like low points of my otherwise glorious career. It's not that like swing and a miss, oh ho hum, you know, I'm having a great time. I don't like there's emotion built into all of this stuff. Nobody wants to have the spotlight on them and fail. However, the half-life of that failure is shorter, right? And maybe others might disagree. You know,
everyone's half-life is probably different.
Yeah,
but
me,
it moves around depending on how you respond to it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that's definitely like, again, like kind of qualitatively different than like playing elite sports or coaching at an elite sports. How long I stay sort of upset is much shorter, generally speaking, unless it's a particularly important moment or whatever. But I don't carry that with me. But kind of to your point, as I said earlier, it's weird to have, as an adult, to have a context for development. Right? Like a place where you can be trying to get actively better at something that you then have to perform or showcase in a public way. And so I've loved that element of it. It's converted the failures into feedback, right? So like it's not failure, it's feedback. Right. And I'm now going to tweak this and try, like the amount of crap that I've adjusted with my stance and my swing and all of that. Sandlot allows me to look at that as an area of opportunity rather than an area of deficiency.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what I love about it, because to come back to like the recurring theme is like, because we're going to just keep playing.
Yeah.
Right. So like there's next time and the season's not over. We didn't lose in the championship game or the first round of the playoffs because I struck out. We might have lost to the Senators because I struck out, or, you know, whatever it may be. But the fact that we can keep playing sort of converts that failure into like a feedback opportunity to tweak and improve.
Well, it's almost like the narrative, that narrative is gone from the collective narrative. There is no season over season turnover of, you know, like the stories like the Cubs didn't win a championship. Like you would never hear this Sandlot team didn't win a championship in 60 years. Like that stuff is totally gone from the way people think about it.
And removing that creates space for other things.
Right.
By not having standings, by each team being able to run their squad how they see fit, by not having a championship or playoffs, you remove those elements and it's a liberating, like those are constraints that are put in place by design in traditional sports settings because they allow us to determine the things we want to determine, which is who is the best and all that. By releasing ourselves of that requirement, it enables all these other things, right? It enables this much longer term trajectory for development. It allows us to treat failure as feedback. It shifts things in ways that are, I think, what's really attracting people to the space.
Yeah.
Right? Sandlot is, by any measure, booming, right? And there's a reason for that. There's a reason that more and more people of all different walks of life are seeing this product. Maybe they see it on Instagram, right? Which is where a lot of this has kind of organically, for better or worse, organically kind of been shared out. Or maybe they come to the Long Time or Go Valley or, you know, one of these spaces and experience it in person. But it's something that has this sort of, not to try to be too cute about it, but like that field of dreams at like sort of like if you build it, they will come. And it's been built and you see people coming.
I've talked to a lot of people about playing Sandlot this year. And I was thinking this morning as I was getting ready to come in here and talk with you about how over the past few years, at least in every space, really, not just sports and business and the way people live, you're seeing a lot of people who study this stuff or look at these spaces and look at these systems describe what they're seeing as a kind of an acceleration of trends, right? We're working from home more now. We were always going to be working from home eventually because of the technology and stuff, but we experienced an accelerating event in the pandemic and things have sped up. Is that something that you've observed? Why is that happening? And then, I don't know, the thing that people express to me most often is gratitude. Like there's a kind of gratitude for those spaces. So what is causing that thankfulness? I know that's like a three-part doozy of a question.
It's a great question. I talk about this a lot in my classes, actually, from a more business standpoint when we look at sports. And there's an NYU professor who's pretty big named Scott Galloway who called the COVID an accelerant. Right? It's like this. We were going this. It's like
lighter fluid.
Fluid
I see
on a
you
fire.
squeezing your hand. It's mustard.
Listener at home, we're pretending to squeeze lighter fluid onto my desk. And I think that's accurate. So like in sports, when we look at big time sports, we saw things that were going to happen eventually, 5 to 10 years down the road, happen in 18 months. Look at the revolution in college sports, for example, with the way that we allow transfers, with name, image, likeness stuff, conference realignment, all like just as one example. Those things are all coming eventually. But what COVID did and this period did was in professional sports and major college sports, it disrupted the revenue models so acutely that it sort of forced us to come out of our naturally more kind of cautious, iterative way of approaching things to our revenues are way down. We got to figure out how we reshape and remodel what we're doing here. And I think, that same, in an analogy sense, like that can extend to people in their sporting social lives, right? So like we're seeing all these teams coming out now, in Austin and beyond. And I think for a lot of people, the pandemic has been this accelerant in the sense it's like you have a finite amount of time on this planet that's combined with a little bit more flexibility in terms of, for a lot of people, not everybody, in terms of like your work and your life and how you can balance those remotely, in person, whatever. And more fundamentally though, most importantly, we are social creatures. So we need to connect with people. And the pandemic shook that up. We've long known that we needed to connect with people more in person. Mm-hmm. That the social media mechanism for connecting was a false idol kind of a thing. It's actually doing more harm than good, because the way evolutionarily, the way that we're hardwired, we need to be in a space with people. And when you're in a space with people pursuing a superordinate goal, something bigger than yourself, as a part of a team concept, that is one of the most human experiences that we can have. And so coming out of the pandemic, people are seeking that in ways that, again, they may not be like conscious of, but that are a force driving, I think, the growth of this. We want connections with people. We need them. And we love sports. We do. We're competitive. We like these things. Now we have a different model, though, that enables us to love sports without feeling like we have to win sports in order to love it. So I think that's what's, at least in part, what's going on.
Yeah. We can just keep playing.
Just keep playing.
Playing. You've been doing this for a while. Now you've been playing baseball, even though you're not a baseball person. What keeps you playing?
Just seeking the love and respect of my son. No. Who's like, oh, you got a hit? Cool. I was over here not paying attention. Yeah. But no, I mean, honestly, what keeps me playing is you. And like our team that we have. Like, I don't want to be a baseball player. I want to be a Cobra. And, the family that we've built around this team, and I'm sure lots of the other teams that we play against feel very similar. Like, to me, that's what keeps me going. And the idea that I can maybe get better at something. But no, for me, it is the fellowship. It's the being a part of something bigger than myself and contributing a small part to something that exists independent of me. Like, that's something that I didn't realize I needed until I found it. And I guess, I mean, I always obviously love sports. So like it was in there, and that's what resonated with me, I think, throughout my life. But yeah, I think I didn't realize until I arrived that this is where I needed to be.
Thanks, Matt, for coming on the show. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Please subscribe if you liked what you heard. You can also follow us on Instagram for new episode teasers and even more sounds of Sandlot. If you've got a heady baseball topic on your mind, I'm obviously down to go there. So send a message to sandlotsocialclubpodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to attach your abstract, but no pressure, because as Matt's quick to point out,
thankfully, most people don't have to live in my head.
This is why we never talk about this during a game, right? You know, this is really the first time we've sat down to talk about any of this.